Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
We are diving deep into, well, probably the most complex and, let's be honest, strategically debated signing of the season in North London.
It has to be. We're talking about Arsenal's new striker, Victor Gyökeres.
Exactly.
And this is so much more than just, a striker who's struggling for goals.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a brilliant case study in tactical philosophy meeting a player profile. Or, well, maybe failing to meet it. We've gathered a whole load of fan sentiment, expert commentary, and we're drawing really heavily on those who watched him just dominate in Portugal.
And on the flip side, the Gunners supporters who are, it seems, locked in this kind of ideological warfare over how to get him playing.
They really are.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're trying to solve the central puzzle facing the Emirates faithful. Is Victor Gyökeres a square peg in a round hole?
That is the question.
We need to really dissect his true player profile, understand the kind of immovable nature of Mikel Arteta's system, and figure out what this tactical misalignment actually means for Arsenal's title hopes right now.
Yeah, because this is a 60 million pound conundrum, isn't it? It's all wrapped up in one massive question mark. We've got to move beyond just the simple stats. We have to explore the deep tactical reasons that have stopped a player who was, let's not forget, Europe's top goal scorer last season from, doing it in the Premier League.
And the story here really isn't about whether he's a good enough player, is it?
Not at all. It's about whether the system he's in even allows him to be good at what he does best.
Right. So to understand the current struggles, we absolutely have to start in Portugal. We have to establish the blueprint for his success at Sporting CP.
We have to. And the context we get from those Sporting fans is, well, it's not just vital, it's genuinely startling.
Startling is the word. We have sources proclaiming Gyökeres was, and this is a quote, the best I've ever seen play with our shirt.
I mean, that is just seismic praise, isn't it? For a club with the history of Sporting.
It's massive.
It is, but, and this is the crucial bit, that praise comes with a necessary and, to be honest, a brutal caveat about his initial limitations.
Okay.
When he first got to Lisbon, the sources are really clear on this. He had, and I quote, an awful first touch, zero build-up play, and a terrible presence in the box. At least in the traditional sense.
Wow. So when you hear that about a player who's just come off a season bagging, 40-plus goals, you start to realize something. His success wasn't down to, technical finesse.
Not at all. It was tactical engineering.
That distinction, tactical engineering over innate technical skill, that just feels like the key to this whole thing. So the question is, how did Ruben Amorim, the Sporting gaffer, how did he figure it out?
It was a profound structural shift in the team. He essentially manufactured the perfect environment for Gyökeres' very specific physical gifts.
So he didn't try to fix the first touch?
No, not at all. He minimized the need for it. And he did this by shifting the team's wingers. They didn't stay out wide on the touchline. They moved inward.
Right.
They started functioning, essentially, as central attacking midfielders, as cams.
Okay, so if they're moving inside, they're not hugging the touchline, they're not stretching the pitch horizontally like, most traditional wingers do, to create space for the fullbacks.
Exactly. They're doing the opposite. They're collapsing towards the center.
Which you'd think would congest everything.
You would, but what it actually did was create tactical congestion in the wide half spaces. It pulled the opposition's fullbacks and defensive midfielders with them into those areas.
Ah, I see.
And this is the crucial part. By moving into those zones, they vacated the deep central channel and, most importantly, the space behind the opposition's deepest central defender.
They created a vacuum.
A perfect vacuum of space. And that vacuum became the hunting ground for Gyökeres.
Right.
His entire success, everything, was based on being fed the ball into that specific, newly manufactured space.
And how he got there. The sources describe his runs as powerful and clunky.
Yes. Clunky is such a great word for it. It emphasizes that this is about raw, straight-line speed and kinetic force. It's not about delicate footwork.
He's a battering ram.
He is.
Yeah.
And his success was all about giving him the longest possible runway to build up a head of steam.
That detail, the clunky runs, it's so important because it just refutes this idea that he's some sort of versatile technician. He's not. He's highly specialized.
He is. He needs defenders to be running backwards towards their own goal or maybe sideways. He's not effective if they're just standing still waiting for him.
And this wasn't just a flat-track bully system, was it? It worked against the big team.
Oh, absolutely. It worked against their biggest rivals, Porto, Benfica, and it even worked against elite European teams like Manchester City.
Wow.
The sporting style was described as playing very vertically. It was all about rapid forward progression. The sources compared it in its intent to, the famous Klopp's Liverpool transition football.
So win the ball back and just go.
Instantly. The first thought was never caution or keeping possession. It was to get the ball into that space for Gyökeres as fast as humanly possible.
Okay. Now, when we contrast that high-speed vertical style with the reality at the Emirates, well, the source material offers a truly damning statistic.
It's quite something, isn't it?
There is only one known instance, one successful execution of this specific style we've just described. A single Gyökeres type through ball and goal against Leeds.
One.
We are talking about a sample size of one when it comes to playing this 60 million pound striker to his established, documented strengths.
The contrast just couldn't be any starker, could it? You have a player profile that was explicitly engineered for high-tempo transitions in open space. His whole career success in Portugal was built on it.
And he's received that service once.
Pretty much once in a major league season. That just screams tactical neglect or, well, incompatibility.
So let's summarize what he is not, based on this sporting perspective, because that feels critical for diagnosing the problem in Arsenal.
Okay. First, he is definitively not a poacher. He doesn't survive on just scraps or little deflection goals inside the 6-yard box. Second, he's not a target man who can consistently hold up the ball with his back to goal against 2 Premier League center backs in a slow, patient build-up.
And the third one is the big one for Arsenal.
It is. He is not capable of involved build-up play, which means asking him to link the midfield and the attack to be that deep-lying number 9, it immediately exposes all of his weakest technical attributes.
So at the end of the day, he's a space predator.
That's the perfect term for him. He's a space predator. And if the system fails to generate that space, his flaws are magnified and his strengths are, well, they're completely nullified.
So let's look at the operational environment at Arsenal then. The fans, the sources, they all describe the default approach as slow, controlled, and deliberate.
Very deliberate possession buildup. And the sources state that because of this, Arsenal constantly face super low blocks.
And that's because, quite frankly, they're seen as probably the best in the league at holding the ball.
Exactly. But that control, that caution, that seems to be the first nail in the coffin for a player with Gyökeres' profile.
Because it just removes that runway you were talking about.
It removes the vertical runway he needs, completely. When you're facing a low block, the other team has already eliminated the space behind their defensive line. It's gone.
They're compact, sitting deep, waiting for you.
And if your entire team is instructed to just recycle possessions safely until a perfect high-percentage pass emerges, well, you are starving a vertical striker of the very fuel he needs.
Which is risk and speed.
Risk and rapid forward movement, yes.
But surely, even against low blocks, a team can use quick combinations, 1-2s, that sort of thing, to penetrate. Where does the systemic failure actually begin to break down his effectiveness?
Well, it's like a domino effect. It cascades from the tactical structure itself, and it really starts with the inverted wingers, with Saka and Martinelli.
Okay.
The sources detail a really fundamental issue here. Their priority is goal scoring first, rather than serving the central striker.
Right. So finding Gyökeres is, what, a secondary thought?
It's a secondary consideration at best, because the team is built to have multiple goal threats from all across that front line.
Let's break down Saka's role in that specifically,
Right.
because he is, the primary creative force on that right-hand side.
Saka is often criticized by fans for frequently slowing the game down.
I've seen that a lot.
He gets the ball, he assesses his options, and rather than playing that high-risk, high-reward through ball, he holds on to it. He waits.
And this often ends with him being triple-teamed, because the defense has had all the time in the world to get back and reorganize.
Exactly. But the key structural issue, the bigger problem, is that Saka tends to push into central spaces. He drifts into that right half space instead of holding the width and stretching the pitch.
And when the wingers push central...
They crowd the exact channels that Gyökeres needs to be open for his vertical runs.
So the team's collective desire to score is actually canceling out the main striker's ability to run into scoring positions.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's like a collective of false nines all surrounding a true number 9. They're taking away his ball and his space.
And speaking of central creators, the fan outcry aimed at Martin Ødegaard, or May, is particularly intense.
The criticism of Ødegaard is widespread. And it really sits at the heart of this whole frustration. He's accused of repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly, ignoring Gyökeres' great runs.
Opting for the safe pass instead.
Always the safe sideways pass. Fans are saying he plays too cautiously, he slows the game down, and he allows the opposition defense to completely reset.
Which makes Gyökeres' hard work totally useless.
Completely. And there's mention of this sort of infamous 10-minute compilation video that's apparently been circulating among the fan base.
Oh, I've heard about this.
It allegedly shows Gyökeres making maybe half a dozen perfect line-breaking runs in a single game.
And just being ignored.
Ignored by every key player. By Ødegaard, by Saka, by Declan Rice, all in favor of a safe, sideways, or even a backward pass.
Okay, hang on a minute. If the fan sources are saying that Gyökeres' presence actually improves results, and we'll get to the stats later, the 8 wins in 10 games thing, but he's scoring few goals and his runs are being ignored, doesn't that fundamentally undermine the whole right player, wrong system argument?
How so?
Well, maybe he's just a better system player than we're giving credit for. Maybe he's a brilliant decoy, and the manager knows this and is using him that way.
That is precisely the internal conflict within the fan base. That's the debate. Because some fans do defend Ødegaard and the gaffer. They argue that Muss is simply executing the philosophy he's been given. They say the issue is systemic caution.
So it's the team that needs to change, not the number 10.
Exactly. The team needs to increase its quickness and its risk tolerance, rather than just scapegoating the main creator. But the anecdotal evidence of those missed opportunities, it remains really compelling. One source cited a specific match against Wolves where Ødegaard ignored a run that would have resulted in an easy goal, just a tap in.
And he chose to play it back instead.
Chose to play the ball back. So if the manager is instructing caution over conversion, then maybe Ødegaard is just the messenger executing those orders.
Let's look at the glimmers of hope then, because there are some. The specific partnerships that seem to momentarily solve this tactical knot, the sources point to Trossard and Eze.
Yeah, and this is a massive tactical tell. Trossard and Eze are highlighted because they operate completely differently to Saka and Martinelli.
How so?
They don't stretch the pitch as aggressively, and crucially, they don't crash into that central channel as quickly or as often.
And that, paradoxically, leaves the space open.
It leaves the necessary space for Gyökeres' vertical runs. They are, simply put, better suited to feed him balls.
So let's use a metaphor here. If Saka and Martinelli are like Formula One cars that immediately just crash into the central space, occupying it.
Yeah, good one.
Then players like Trossard and Eze are more patient. They hold the ball up, they draw defenders towards them, and they wait for the gap to form.
That's a perfect way to put it. Think of it like clearing a bowling lane. Saka and Martinelli get the ball, and they immediately dart towards the pins, right? They occupy the space, force the center backs to mark them tightly. Trossard, on the other hand, he stands there holding the ball, he draws the defense out of position, makes them wait, and that is what creates the clear track and the angle for Gyökeres to exploit with his run.
So they get the best out of him precisely because they are not focused on their own scoring runs into his preferred zones.
Spot on. And this reverse engineering of the attack, it just suggests that Arsenal's default system is actively detrimental to their £60 million investment.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? That his best partners are the ones who disrupt the expected pattern of Arteta ball.
It really does.
If your standard first-choice wingers are actively canceling out your main striker's primary strength, then you have a strategic dilemma that goes way beyond simple player form.
Okay, so let's move on to the performance data. Because at first glance, the goals tally is the immediate sticking point.
It is. 4 goals from 18 Premier League appearances, 6 in 19 overall.
For a striker who is signed as, a guaranteed goal provider, that output it's pretty underwhelming.
Especially if, as some fan sources allege, those goals are mostly against, quote, crap teams.
And the counterargument to that is swift. It's that the Premier League is a different beast.
Of course.
Those powerful, clunky runs that worked so well in Portugal, they're just not as effective against higher caliber Premier League center backs who are, better positioned, faster, and more physical.
The assertion is that he just doesn't have the technical subtlety to navigate those tight spaces you get in this league.
And that argument is backed up by some specific match details. One source noted he reportedly didn't dribble past a single player in a recent match against Wolves.
Not one.
Not one, which indicates his inability to create space for himself through individual skill when he's being tightly marked. If he can't run into space and he can't create space himself,
he stalls.
He stalls. However, this is where we have to delve into the unseen impact. This is the cornerstone of the pro-Gyökeres defense.
Okay.
Fans acknowledge his massive positive defensive contribution, his tireless pressure from the front, but more importantly, they view him as a decoy and gravitational target man.
Gravitational target man. I like that. Explain that concept.
Well, it's the critical insight we can't just gloss over. The idea is that even if he isn't scoring or even touching the ball, his mere reputation and his aggressive forward movement force central defenders to commit to him.
So he's pulling them out of position.
He's pulling the opposition's deepest center back away from the zone, and that doesn't benefit him on the score sheet, but it massively benefits the players around him.
Okay, so how does that actually translate onto the pitch? Who is specifically benefiting when Gyökeres is doing this decoy duty?
That's an excellent question. When Gyökeres is occupying two center backs high up the pitch, it fundamentally changes the space available for Arsenal's midfielders and inverted wingers. For instance, his gravitational pull ties up that deepest central defender, which in turn creates crucial passing lanes or little half spaces for Martin Ødegaard to operate in.
I see.
Or it might allow someone like Declan Rice to push higher up into more advanced midfield positions because the immediate danger of a counterattack deep in their half is delayed.
So he's destabilizing the opposition's defensive shape just by running, even if the ball never comes to him.
Precisely. And this means his value has to be measured in systemic benefits and defensive disruption, not just in individual goal output.
Which makes the statistical debate that follows even more confusing and more subjective.
It does, because we have these really conflicting views on team performance when he starts.
Right, so let's take argument 1, the pro-Gyökeres perspective.
Okay, so they suggest the team's results are objectively better when he is in the side. They point to those first 10 games before his injury,
Where Arsenal won 8, drew 1, and lost 1.
and they conclude that his unseen contributions, the pressing, the decoy runs, that they translate directly into a more consistent winning team.
But the anti-Gyökeres camp calls those statistics ridiculously skewed. Why?
Because they argue you have to factor in the quality of the opposition. The anti-Gyökeres side maintains that the team faced much better opponents when he was absent or injured.
Okay.
So while the pro camp points to drop points against Sunderland, Chelsea, and Villa during his absence, the opposition argues those points were dropped due to broader defensive injuries at the time.
Forcing Rice to play deeper, which affects the whole balance of the midfield.
Exactly. So for them, the raw goals tally against the so-called crap teams remains their key metric of his individual failure.
It's an impossible argument to resolve without some really complex contextual data, isn't it? But the core fact remains that he missed vital adaptation time.
He did. And we have to acknowledge the non-tactical factors here, fitness and adaptation. He arrived already struggling. He'd effectively gone on strike and refused to train or play for Sporting to force the move to Arsenal.
Which immediately robbed him of a full preseason. You can't just walk into a complex system like Arteta's without that.
You can't, and that lack of full fitness, followed by a hamstring injury later in the season that clearly impacted his confidence, meant he was always playing catch-up.
He wasn't just integrating a new style of football. He was trying to do it from a severely underprepared physical baseline.
Which, in a league as demanding as the Premier League, that's a huge, huge disadvantage. It makes the adaptation curve feel almost vertical.
Okay, let's pivot to the striker hierarchy debate. Because Arsenal now has 4 really distinct options, and the discussion over who is number 1 is, well, it's highly divisive. Let's start with Gabriel Jesus.
Jesus is pretty much universally lauded for his technical ability, his dynamic attacks, and his superb link-up play.
He's the embodiment of that false nine mentality that Arsenal seemed to thrive on.
He is, and for any listeners who might not be familiar with the term, a false nine is a striker who primarily drops deep into midfield to link play, rather than staying high and challenging the center backs.
And Jesus excels at that. Receiving the ball in tight spaces, knitting attacks together.
It's why when he returns from injury, the whole team instantly changes. They start passing the ball way more than they do to Gyökeres. He just fits Arteta ball perfectly.
But his weaknesses are just as notorious. He's frequently criticized as being a poor finisher. As the saying goes, he can't finish a glass of water.
It's a common refrain. And you have to add to that his worrying status as being made of glass, his frequent, sometimes lengthy injury layoffs.
It makes him a high-risk, high-reward option who doesn't provide that consistent goal threat you need for a title challenge.
Then you have Kai Havertz.
And the fan consensus right now seems to suggest he's the best fit for the system overall.
I'd agree. He strikes a superb balance. He offers good hold-up play, exceptional off-ball intelligence, and he's fantastic in the air, which gives Arsenal a genuine aerial threat they often lack.
He seems to be the tactical hybrid, doesn't he? The perfect blend between the facilitator, Jesus, and the aerial threat you might expect from a more traditional number 9.
He gives you the pressing intensity of Jesus, but he offers better presence in the box, and he runs the channels really intelligently.
And his goals-to-appearance ratio is viewed by many as the best among the current options.
Yeah, the general prediction is that he will be the main striker when everyone is fit. He does all the system-required stuff, the pressing, the linking, the movement, but he adds genuine high-percentage goal scoring on top.
Which makes him indispensable to Arteta's philosophy of control.
It does. And finally, the sources throw in a bit of a dark horse. Merino.
Yes, Merino.
He's mentioned by several fans as a viable false 9 option, or even, surprisingly, the best striker option because of his versatility and link-up capabilities.
Particularly when the team needs extreme control in midfield.
Exactly. And this array of choices, Jesus the technician, Havertz the hybrid presser, Gyökeres the vertical runner, and Merino the versatile linkman, it highlights the sheer tactical spectrum available to Arteta.
But it also accentuates the problem.
It does. They haven't settled on a single, undisputed, world-class number 9 who fits all the requirements.
And this brings us right to the fundamental ideological clash that the Gyökeres transfer has exposed. The fan base is completely divided over who has to compromise. Is it the manager's rigid system, or is it the player's unique goal-scoring profile?
The majority viewpoint, certainly among those who defend Arteta, is that the manager is a prisoner of his own philosophy, but in a positive way.
Okay, what does that mean?
They argue he's unwilling to compromise on his principles precisely because those principles are what drive the team's success.
The defensive stability.
Exactly. The fact that they concede the least goals in Europe is tied directly to that meticulous control and that caution in their build-up play.
So if the system is sacred because it delivers success and defensive solidity, the logical conclusion is that Gyökeres has to be the one to adapt.
He has to, which means he needs a radical overhaul. He needs to dramatically improve his technical game, his first touch, his passing, his build-up involvement.
A whole lot.
And that adaptation is often framed as him needing to become a Roberto Firmino-type forward.
Right. A deep-lying creative forward who links the play, creates space for others, but also chips in with the odd goal.
That's the idea, but the sources are quick to refute that comparison, aren't they?
They are. So why is Gyökeres not a viable Firmino successor?
Because Firmino, during his peak at Liverpool, was just technically sublime. He had excellent hold-up play, control, first touch, and provided killer passes.
And the critique of Gyökeres is
that he's way behind his level as a false 9 compared to Firmino. He simply does not possess the innate, nuanced technical ability that you need to transform into that type of deep-lying creative forward.
His profile is physical and vertical. Firmino's was technical and creative.
It's like asking an apple to become an orange. Asking Gyökeres to become Firmino is asking him to entirely abandon his established identity.
Which makes the counter-argument so compelling. Why on earth would you spend a reported £60 million on a player whose goal-scoring record in the right system is undeniably brilliant, only to force him to abandon the one thing he does so well?
It's a very fair question.
If he can't adapt, then the cost versus the actual role he's filling, which is, a distraction player, it makes the entire transfer feel like a fundamental error in recruitment strategy.
And that's why the advocates for system change are so vocal. They demand that Arteta introduces more verticality.
They want the team to pass quicker, take more risks,
and play the crucial through balls that actually exploit Gyökeres' strengths, rather than sticking to the current cautious game plan. They see this lack of service as coached caution.
Not a lack of ability from the players to see the pass.
No. They believe the players could make the pass, but they're being instructed not to.
And this is where that anecdotal frustration, that compilation video comes back into play, painting such a vivid picture of the conflict. What exactly are fans seeing when they watch Gyökeres make these ignored runs?
They're seeing a striker executing the most valuable move in football, breaking the defensive line, only to be denied the ball.
Can you give us an example?
Okay, so Gyökeres might make a brilliant diagonal run that splits the two center backs, forcing the entire opposition defense into a reactive scramble. But instead of Martin Ødegaard releasing the early pass.
He opts for the 5-yard sideways safety pass to Declan Rice.
Exactly. And the immediate consequence is the opposition defense is allowed to just drop back, reset its low block, and that moment of genuine vulnerability is just lost.
And this happens repeatedly.
Over and over, which convinces this faction of the fan base that the manager's caution is actively costing them goals.
The sources even speculate that if Arsenal played with the speed and the counter-attacking philosophy of their previous title-challenging season, the 22-23 season, Gyökeres would already have 25-plus goals and could potentially have delivered the league trophy that year. It suggests the philosophy shifted after he arrived.
And that internal friction is massively amplified by the reported transfer intrigue. The sources widely suggest that Gyökeres was not Arteta's first choice.
Right, which would explain the tactical dissonance.
It would. It's reported that the director of football, Edu, perhaps influenced by external factors or specific agency relationships, was the one who pushed really hard for the Gyökeres signing.
So if Edu pushed for Gyökeres, who did Arteta actually want?
Arteta was reportedly leaning towards profiles that better fit his technical and versatile mold, specifically Benjamin Sesko.
Described as a gigantic, dynamic striker he can mold.
Exactly. Or Dusan Vlahovic. Both offer better technical hold-up play and are closer approximations to that hybrid false nine role he seems to prefer.
So if that managerial misalignment is accurate, it just contextualizes the entire situation, doesn't it?
It really does.
Arteta acquired a transitional vertical runner when he wanted a technical false nine, and now he's forced to ask the player to fundamentally change his identity to fit the established system.
Which is why the argument that spending $60 million on a player who's then relegated to a distraction player or just a squad depth option is straight up dreadful business, why that holds so much weight.
You invest that kind of sum expecting a nailed-on starter, not a sophisticated decoy.
And inevitably, the discussion drags in Erling Haaland. Some fans defend the idea of building the team around Gyökeres by pointing to how Manchester City shifted to accommodate Haaland.
But that comparison is strongly refuted within the source material.
Very strongly.
What's the rebuttal to the Haaland comparison?
Well, the counter-argument is simple and, I think, quite powerful. Haaland was already a generational talent at 22. He was dominating the Champions League, setting scoring records in the Bundesliga.
You adjust your entire system for a generational talent who has proven he's world-class at the very highest level.
Exactly. Conversely, Gyökeres, at the same age, was struggling at Brighton and Coventry. He's a talented player making his first step up to that elite status, not a proven global superstar.
So the risk calculus is entirely different.
Completely. The expectation remains that Gyökeres is the one who must adapt to the established title-contending system, not the other way around.
So we've established the conflict, the tactical mismatch. Now, where do the sources suggest this saga goes from here? The most sympathetic part of the fan base immediately points to the need for time. They cite the old Thierry Henry needed time defense.
That argument suggests it's just far too early to judge. He hasn't even completed half a season of consistent fitness and starting games.
Yeah.
They argue that confidence and time are the missing elements, especially given that compromised preseason he had.
And they have a powerful recent example right there in the squad with Kai Havertz.
They do. Havertz had an extremely slow start to his Arsenal career. He was facing massive fan criticism, yet after January, he found his stride, completely integrated, and became a must-start.
So what did Havertz change that Gyökeres now has to emulate?
Havertz successfully adapted his off-ball intelligence to suit the system. He improved his press resistance and his movement in the final third to link the play, rather than just relying on raw pace.
He found his niche as that hybrid false nine/attacking eight.
He did. And for Gyökeres, the proponents of patience believe that once he stops overthinking the technical stuff and just commits fully to the runs.
And crucially, once the confidence returns to allow the forward players to trust those runs.
Our goals will flow, that's the belief.
But patience is a luxury that Arsenal simply do not have right now.
Exactly. The counter-argument stresses the urgency of the title race. They're battling Manchester City and, a title can be lost in half a season.
They can't afford to wait a full year for a £60 million striker to adapt when every single point is critical.
The pressure to deliver now favors the known system fitters, Jesus and Havertz.
So if this adaptation fails, if this tactical knot cannot be untied, what are the proposed short-term and long-term resolutions that are coming out of the fan discourse?
In the short term, the tactical consensus is quite pragmatic. revert to playing Havertz and Jesus as the primary strikers when they're fully fit.
And Gyökeres gets relegated to a rotation or a plan B option.
A plan B option, yeah. He's seen as most effective against teams that play a more open, high-pressing game because that leaves the necessary vertical space for him to exploit.
But when facing the inevitable low block,
The system prefers the technicality and the link-up play of the others.
and the long-term view is much more drastic. It involves cutting their losses, which is a difficult conversation to have about a player signed so recently for such a huge fee.
It is, but some sources are suggesting they sell him outright and reinvest the money into a profile that Arteta clearly prefers.
And they're floating ideas like swapping him for Sesko.
Swapping him for Sesko, who fans believe would thrive better at Arsenal due to his height and his technical mold, or looking for a completely different striker profile altogether.
Names like Lautaro Martinez are mentioned.
Lautaro Martinez, due to his trophy success and proven ability in a top league, or even a strong technical target man in the mold of Olivier Giroud, someone who's a better fit for breaking down low blocks with better hold-up play.
You know, whether this transfer is ultimately deemed a failure or a long-term success, there is one undeniable positive outcome that the sources have highlighted.
And what's that?
The depth and the tactical versatility that's been created by having these 4 distinct striker profiles.
That's a very good point. Having Jesus, Havertz, Gyökeres, and Merino means Arteta has tools for almost any tactical scenario.
He can switch between a technical facilitator like Jesus, a false 9 aerial threat in Havertz, a transitional runner in Gyökeres, and a versatile link man in Merino.
And that level of squad depth makes Arsenal much, much harder for opponents to predict and to strategize against.
That versatility really is the silver lining in what many people are viewing as a tactical misstep or transfer misalignment.
It is. If the gaffer can successfully implement a plan B that uses Gyökeres' strengths when plan A, the slow possession, hits a wall.
Say in the last 20 minutes of a tight match.
Exactly. Then the entire squad is infinitely stronger for it. #tag outro.
So let's review the key takeaways from this deep dive then. The paradox of Victor Gyökeres is, well, it's pretty extraordinary. He's a vertical, powerful runner whose primary attacking movements are often ignored by his cautious teammates.
Yet his mere presence acts as this powerful decoy, forcing defensive shifts that arguably elevated the team's overall consistency in the early part of the season.
The conflict is stark, and it's clear. The player, a specialist built for high-speed transitional football, is attempting to survive in a managerial philosophy that demands cautious, possession-heavy control against these entrenched low-block defenses.
So this whole debate isn't really about Gyökeres' fundamental quality?
No, not at all. It's about whether the system can afford to accommodate an outlier, even an outlier with a £60 million price tag and the European Golden Boot reputation.
He is the classic case of the right player in the wrong system.
Where the system is currently proving to be stubbornly inflexible.
And that system inflexibility, that leads us to our final thought for you to mull over. If Arsenal continues to rely primarily on strikers who are facilitators and link-up specialists, players like Jesus and Havertz, and consistently struggles to successfully integrate a prolific traditional volume goal scorer like Gyökeres, does that suggest that Mikel Arteta's tactical system has permanently sacrificed the idea of signing and utilizing a 25-plus goal-a-season striker, all for the sake of achieving absolute system control and unparalleled defensive stability?
So is control ultimately the currency of success at the Emirates, even if it comes at the expense of guaranteed firepower?
That's the question.